Hello, this is Forrest, and I wanted to give you an update since my very tearful video from the other night. I've been doing a lot of thinking about not only this election and the things that are at stake for us personally and as a nation, but also the question of privilege. It's come up a lot lately. Particularly in the responses to my last video, which were surprisingly mostly really kind. There were a tremendous number of people who were so supportive and so open to what I had to say, and that kindness was coming from all over the political spectrum, from people who are very staunch libertarians and Hillary supporters and Republicans and what have you. So it wasn't just people who agree with me politically who could see some validity in what I was saying, and I appreciate that. There were, not surprisingly, some pretty harsh criticisms as well, and I noticed as I was listening to them and as I was processing them and trying to weigh the validity of these criticisms and see if there were ways that what they had to say could be applied, but I couldn't help but notice that they were frequently coming from people in positions of privilege, pretty noteworthy privilege, people who are wealthy and people who probably stand to lose a lot of that privilege, or at least the comfort in disregarding that privilege if Bernie Sanders does take office and create the kind of change in this country that he'd like to. It was interesting to me because privilege was a concept that I struggled to get through my thick skull for a while. Privilege was something that I had a hard time really understanding. I remember very early in this campaign season when the Black Lives Matter activists disrupted a Bernie Sanders rally. I was among the people who said, "Oh, well, they're shooting themselves in the foot." And this is someone who actually has been fighting for civil rights since the 60s. This is someone who actually very much supports the notion that marginalized populations are not to be marginalized, that the very phenomenon within our culture of making people seem lesser by virtue of race or sexual orientation or gender identity or economic standing, that these things are not to be tolerated, that these are not the principles on which we want America to continue to grow. And so I had a hard time with the notion that the BLM protesters were targeting Bernie. But over the last several months, I've really gotten it through my skull why it was important that they be disruptive, and why it was important that they demand to be heard and not wait their turn and not wait for a polite moment. I mean, maybe, and I'm not a BLM activist, so I can't speak to their motivations, but I can see that Bernie was a really good choice to disrupt in the beginning, because he listens and because his rallies are not homogenized and filtered to make sure that people in the audience are only in support of Bernie. His rallies are not overrun with vast amounts of security. In fact, he didn't even get Secret Service detail until probably about a month ago. So yeah, from a protester's point of view, if you're going to get your message heard in a broader, more, I don't know, in a way that reaches more people, then yeah, I guess reaching through Bernie is even if it is in a contentious or disruptive way, it's an effective way. It worked. Got people listening, and it got the right people listening, because if you're listening to Bernie, then you're open to the very concept of oppression within American society. You're open to the notion that, yeah, sometimes people got to get loud in order to have their message respected. So I'm starting to get it. And then in these last few days, since I made my impassioned and tearful video, the criticisms that I've been getting have been largely from people in positions of privilege, from people who think that speaking up that way that speaking up in that way is that it's doing myself and my message a disservice, because I'm doing it in a way that's not comfortable or polite. And see, that's what I really finally got about privilege, is that when you're confronting it, it is uncomfortable. It's necessarily uncomfortable. Being a Caucasian person in the United States of America, I am privileged. I am given the benefit of the doubt in certain ways. With regard to my societal standing, I can walk into a coffee shop and be treated differently than someone who walks into a coffee shop whose skin is a different color, or who is visibly racially different from what I am. And that is a truth. That's a thing that happens every day, all the time. It's not made up, and it sure as hell is not comfortable to deal with. And we look at it from the perspective of economic privilege. Yes, there are people in this country who are really benefiting from the way things are, from the status quo as it is. They tend not to be Bernie supporters. I can't blame them. I can't blame them for wanting to keep things comfortable, because it works for them. That doesn't mean it should continue to work for them, because the way things are is not fair. And I think we all know that deep down. And so people in positions of economic privilege who are uncomfortable with recognizing that privilege and are resentful of being called out on that, either directly or indirectly, by pointing out that the way that this society is currently operating is favoring those in positions of economic privilege and treating them as if they are of greater human value. We use the term net worth as if it means that you as a human being are worth more, intrinsically more valuable as a human being than other people who have less money. And that I feel like really it gets close to the foundation of our society's current problems. And it hit me like a ton of bricks over these last few days in talking about the video and talking about the campaign in general, and coming back from the results of Super Tuesday. And man, there really started to get to be an edge and almost a viciousness from people who would respond, who were responding from a place of privilege, not wanting to recognize it, not wanting to acknowledge it, and certainly not wanting to be called out on it. And it was interesting to note what that feels like when you speak up as one of America's educated poor, one of America's working poor, one of America's trying to get by and not quite understanding why all the rules that you are following as they were set for you is still not getting you any closer to being able to afford stability for yourself and for your family. Yeah, when you're in that place and you're speaking with someone who enjoys a different economic condition, that conversation can get really contentious really fast. There's a lot of resentment on both sides. There's resentment on the side of the poor, and there's resentment on the side of the less poor or the very wealthy, because instead of just talking about how much we have in terms of resources and how we're using those resources, or perhaps hoarding or hiding those resources. We're talking about each other as people and not really knowing that. We're talking about our inherent worth. That's in the conversation, and we're not acknowledging that that's in the conversation. So unpacking this concept of net worth and human value is a really important part, I think, of beginning to understand what's at the root of several of society's issues, and the question of privilege and these different forms of privilege that we're navigating right now. So thanks for listening. I thought that was worth saying. Hope you do too.